They say true love can survive any storm, but Andrew Whitmore never believed he'd abandon his pregnant wife and lose everything he once cherished. 5 years passed in quiet agony until the day Lillian Whitmore returned. She didn't come alone. With her stood a bright-eyed boy named Oliver, clutching her hand and harboring secrets that could topple Andrew's carefully rebuilt empire. In this extraordinary tale of betrayal and redemption, fortunes change in the blink of an eye. Hearts are torn between regret and longing, and a mother's determination reshapes destinies. Brace yourself for an emotional roller coaster of wealth, power, and family secrets. Andrew Whitmore was born into wealth. His father, the formidable Richard Whitmore, was an oil magnate in Texas, known for his stern face and unyielding principles. Andrew grew up watching his father bend the world to his will, closing deals, shaping markets, and snapping up real estate as though it were candy. Their lavish Houston estate boasted marble floors, gold-plated fixtures, and a grand foyer large enough to host charity galas under glittering chandeliers. To outsiders, Andrew's life seemed perfect from day one, but not every gilded cage is happy. Andrew learned early on that love could be treated as currency. His parents' relationship was cordial yet sterile, filled with handshake agreements rather than shared laughter. Over time, Andrew grew accustomed to forging alliances rather than emotional bonds. He attended the most prestigious boarding schools, gleaned lessons not in camaraderie, but in competition. Despite his fortune, a strange hollowness took root in his soul. It was in his early 20s, during a philanthropic function in New York City, that Andrew encountered Lillian Monroe. She was there as a volunteer, collecting donations for an orphanage. Soft-spoken but resolute, she wore a simple black dress that didn't so much hide her beauty as accentuate her understated grace. It wasn't her looks alone that entranced Andrew, it was the calm dignity she radiated. Far from the grasping socialites he typically encountered, Lillian seemed untouched by greed. He introduced himself with his usual brand of effortless confidence. Lillian, aware of his last name's power, remained courteous but distant. Intrigued by her reluctance to swoon at the mention of the Whitmore fortune, Andrew pursued her, determined to win the heart of the one woman who didn't appear dazzled by his wealth. They began a fast-paced courtship, full of stolen glances at charity dinners, shared laughter over late-night ice cream in Harlem, and gentle confessions. For Lillian, Andrew was the man who made her feel like the center of the universe, a man who, despite a gruff exterior, held a well of tenderness. When he proposed, it wasn't at some elaborate gala. It was during a quiet walk through Central Park. He handed Lillian a single red rose, symbolizing the sincerity and simplicity of his love. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she nodded with a trembling smile. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony in her hometown, with only close friends and family present. For a time, their marriage was built on that tenderness, but Andrew, fresh from business school and craving his father's approval, sank deeper into his growing enterprise. Long hours in glass-walled offices took him away from Lillian's side. When she tried to talk to him about needing emotional support, he'd offer extravagant gifts instead: diamond necklaces, designer gowns, expensive vacations. Initially, she accepted these gestures, hoping they meant something deeper, but over time, she discovered they were simply placeholders for genuine affection. A year into their marriage, their arguments revolved around the smallest of issues. Lillian wanted them to dine together. Andrew was too busy. She wished for weekend walks. He had urgent deals. In the final months, they both saw the rift widening. She asked him for time. He gave her credit cards and personal shoppers. She pleaded for emotional intimacy. He responded with worry over his company's stock prices. Unsurprisingly, she soon discovered she was pregnant And yet, even this momentous news felt overshadowed by Andrew's hectic schedule. He insisted he was delighted, and for a few days, glimmers of the old Andrew reappeared. But as soon as his father called with another high-stakes opportunity, he disappeared again into corporate chaos. Their spark began to fade. Uncertainty replaced hope, and heartbreak replaced what once felt like magic. Little did they know that the child Lillian carried would become the catalyst for a chain of events that would change their lives and hearts forever. Tensions soared during Lillian's pregnancy. She found herself alone in a cavernous mansion filled with memories she'd never made. Each morning she'd try to greet Andrew with a serene smile, hoping he might stay a moment longer, ask about her cravings, or place a reassuring hand on her growing belly. But Andrew, fraught with business stress, would rush to the office before the sun had fully risen. In these moments of loneliness, Lillian's worst fears took root. She worried her child would never feel a father's warmth. Andrew's father, Richard, was barely in the picture, a controlling presence behind the scenes who offered occasional remarks about prenatal care, but mostly focused on whether the unborn heir would be a boy. Lillian would overhear staff whispering that the old Whitmore patriarch simply wanted an heir to groom for future business expansions. In her 7th month, Lillian tried to reach Andrew at the office after feeling faint and nearly collapsing on the kitchen floor. Despite a panicked voicemail, she got no immediate callback. Hours later, he returned home with an expression that was part fatigue, part annoyance. "Lillian," he said curtly, "do you realize I was in the middle of a huge negotiation? You could have called the family doctor." The frustration in his tone hammered into her heart. That night, she went to sleep in a different bedroom, sobbing quietly into pillows. Andrew, either oblivious to or unwilling to confront the depth of her distress, buried himself in financial reports. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment she realized she had to leave. Perhaps it was during a prenatal checkup, watching happy couples cradle each other's hands in the waiting room. Perhaps it was when she looked at her wedding photo and felt only a hollow ache rather than joy. Or maybe it was the day Andrew left for a 3-week business trip in Europe, just as she entered her 8th month. Lillian decided to pen him a letter, one last attempt to clarify her feelings. She wrote late into the night, describing her despair at feeling more like an accessory than a wife. She expressed her longing for emotional support and the fear that their child would grow up in a cold, unloving home. The next morning, with her bag packed and tears streaming down her face, she placed the letter on his nightstand. Then she walked out the ornate front doors, never once glancing back at the masterpiece of architectural grandeur that felt like a lonely fortress. Andrew returned from Europe, thoroughly exhausted yet triumphant about sealing an unprecedented merger. Riding this wave of success, he called for Lillian from the foyer, wanting to celebrate. But his voice echoed unanswered through empty halls. On the nightstand, he found her letter. The lines were blurred where her tears had fallen. A pang of regret stabbed him as he scanned her words. She spoke of heartbreak, isolation, and the desperate wish that their child be raised in a warm environment, not in the shadows of business deals. The letter ended with a final statement: "I love you, Andrew, but if you can't love me enough to be here, let me find a path where I can protect our child from neglect. I'm leaving, not because I want to stop loving you, but because I must love our baby more." Shock, guilt, and a flicker of panic warred in Andrew's chest. He tried calling her cell phone, only to be greeted by a disconnected tone. He reached out to her family and friends, but no one knew her whereabouts or refused to tell him, claiming Lillian needed peace. Days stretched into weeks, then months. Word of her whereabouts never reached him, no matter how many private investigators he hired. Her sudden disappearance became a haunting refrain in his life. a sorrow he tried to bury beneath surging company expansions and shining new acquisitions. The breaking point was sealed. Andrew concluded that Lillian had left for good, taking the unborn child he hadn't even met. Little did he realize that his entire future would revolve around the reappearance of that very woman and the tiny soul he'd inadvertently banished from his life. Following Lillian's disappearance, the Whitmore mansion fell into a hush. Staff carried on their tasks with mechanical precision. If Andrew noticed the gloom, he never acknowledged it. Instead, he retreated to the corporate world, forging deals at a frenetic pace. His father, Richard, though initially irate at the lost heir, soon refocused on business. In his mind, fortune and influence were the cornerstones of survival. Personal anguish was secondary. If acknowledged at all, Andrew's heart grew numb. When he tried to recall Lillian's laughter or the gentle glow in her eyes, regret gnawed at him. He couldn't extinguish the question, would things have turned out differently if he'd come home that day instead of attending a trivial board meeting? But each time remorse surfaced, he buried himself in a new multi-million-dollar venture, chasing expansions from Miami to Los Angeles. 6 months after her departure, the divorce papers arrived at Andrew's office without fanfare. Given that Lillian's location was undisclosed, her attorney handled everything by proxy. Andrew stared at the documents, uncertain. The details indicated that Lillian wanted no financial support. She wanted no share of the Whitmore estate. In fact, she asked only for a swift, uncontested dissolution. Andrew was left reeling. The cynic in him wanted to see it as her final punishment for ignoring her, but a hidden part of him believed it was an act of mercy, her way of cutting ties so she could raise their child in peace, free from the power plays of the Whitmore empire. Reluctantly, Andrew signed the papers. If Lillian wanted to vanish, he rationalized, maybe that was what he deserved. After all, wasn't he the one who had emotionally abandoned her first? Yet, when the final documents confirmed the divorce, a rush of emptiness overwhelmed him. He tried reaching out to a mutual acquaintance, Jennifer Maxwell, hoping that she might provide a clue. But Jennifer only shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes as she whispered, "She asked me not to tell you anything." Andrew's father had little sympathy. "You're better off without a woman who runs away," Richard snapped. It was the final blow to Andrew's attempts at redemption. He returned to the silent corridors of his own guilt. Day after day he pushed forward, convinced that burying heartbreak under success was the only viable route. In the months that followed, talk among society's elite began swirling around Andrew's single status. Suitors lined up to capture the heart of the newly available Whitmore heir. But Andrew, once a figure of suave charm, turned aloof and unapproachable. He endured a few obligatory dinner dates arranged by well-meaning associates, but found that each forced conversation only deepened his loneliness. Lillian's absence hung in every corner of his life. His business empire flourished. Each new acquisition was lauded as a stroke of genius. Articles in national magazines highlighted his rise to becoming one of the nation's youngest self-made magnates, although the word self-made was something Andrew secretly scoffed at, considering his father's resources. Still, the world admired him. The Whitmore brand soared, and Andrew built a fortress of respect in the corporate arena. Time, as it often does, dulled the immediate pain, but it never truly healed the wound. Andrew told himself it was better to remain unattached, to avoid bringing another person into a lonely life. Though he never spoke of it, regret became his shadow. His vow to cherish Lillian lay in tatters, abandoned like a broken promise on a deserted road. If he dreamt of her at night, waking up breathless and tearful, no one ever knew. The only thing that remained was a question that throbbed in the silent spaces of his life. Where was she? And was she safe? That question stayed with him for 5 years, quietly shaping him into the man he was destined to become. A man who, one fateful day, would stand face to face with the consequences of a past he couldn't erase. Lillian Monroe, who continued to call herself Lillian Whitmore in secret, if only to honor the promise she once believed in, fled to a small coastal town named Fairhaven in Massachusetts. She'd found it by chance on a map, drawn to the idea of a quiet seafront community. Settling into a modest clapboard cottage near the shoreline, she began the precarious journey of raising a child alone. With her mother no longer alive and an estranged relationship with her father, she relied on her own resourcefulness. The day after she arrived, she visited the local library in search of job listings. Fate intervened when the librarian, an elderly gentleman named George Thompson, noticed her swollen belly and tired eyes. He offered her a temporary position, assisting with the cataloguing of new arrivals and a small stipend. Grateful, Lillian accepted. Thus began her life of quiet resilience. She spent her days shelving books and learning the rhythms of the ocean air. Nights were spent poring over prenatal guides, crocheting blankets and whispering lullabies to the growing child within her. Many evenings she'd step outside, listening to the distant crash of waves, wishing Andrew were there to place a gentle hand on her belly. But each time the ache grew too strong, she reminded herself of the suffocating loneliness she'd felt in that Texas mansion. The birth of her son came one chilly morning in late March. She had no family in the waiting room, but the local midwife Alice Pearson became a guardian angel. Through every contraction, Lillian remembered the letter she'd left behind. She clung to the notion that she was doing this for her child, determined to offer him a life where love wasn't overshadowed by corporate intrigue. When the baby arrived, Lillian named him Oliver Andrew Whitmore. She sobbed uncontrollably, half from physical exhaustion, half from the wave of maternal love that overwhelmed her. Oliver was a tiny miracle, with Andrew's intense eyes and her own gentle demeanor. And from that moment on, she vowed she would shield him from the cold shadows of the world she once knew. Survival wasn't easy. With hospital bills and scant resources, Lillian turned to every creative skill she possessed. She baked pies for a local diner. She worked part-time cleaning offices after closing hours. She babysat for neighbors who needed a night out, always with Oliver strapped in a carrier by her side. Sleep was a luxury, but her spirit remained fierce. Over time, the quaint Fairhaven community embraced her. When storms battered the coast, neighbors checked in with warm meals. When Oliver's first birthday approached, a handful of local families pooled resources to surprise them with a small party on the beach. While Lillian had no illusions that Fairhaven could shield her from Andrew's or Richard's far-reaching influence forever, she took solace in the sense of family she found among strangers turned allies. In rare private moments, often in the stillness of early morning, Lillian allowed herself to imagine an alternate reality. In it, Andrew was a caring husband, joyfully cradling their newborn, dancing around the living room to lullabies. She'd envisioned the father and son fishing off a dock or opening presents under a Christmas tree. But each time, the images dissolved into the memory of empty stares and missed phone calls. She might have buried her heartbreak completely if not for Oliver. Every day, he reminded her of Andrew in unexpected ways, a tilt of the head, a wry grin, a stubborn determination. And with those reminders came bittersweet comfort, proof that Andrew had given her the most precious gift of all, even if he'd never learned to appreciate it. Had she known what the future would bring, an unforeseen fortune, a confrontation that would upend her life once more, she might have prepared herself differently. But in that sleepy coastal town, with the crash of waves in the background and the scent of salt in the air, Lillian only knew how to do one thing: survive. With Oliver's arrival, each passing day turned into a lesson on resilience. Lillian discovered reserves of determination she never knew she possessed. She'd wake before sunrise, shower and dress in record time, then whisk Oliver off to Miss S. Dawson's modest daycare. The fee was low, nearly half her earnings at the library, but it gave her precious hours to work without worrying about her son's safety. At the library, she excelled at administrative tasks. Within a year, her meticulous nature and warm demeanor earned her a promotion to assistant librarian. She found herself in charge of planning local reading events, children's story hours, and even small community gatherings. No one had ever told Lillian she was incapable, yet deep down, she'd always carried a quiet insecurity from her marriage, feeling overshadowed by Andrew's successes. Now, for the first time, she built her own successes step by step. Oliver grew into a bundle of curiosity, toddling around, eager to explore the shelves whenever Lillian brought him in for a quick visit. Sometimes, the mere sight of him pulling a picture book off the bottom shelf made her heart swell. He was a child of simple joys, bright-eyed at the sound of seagulls, laughing in delight when waves tickled his feet. He knew nothing of the wealth that coursed through his veins, nothing of the absent father who roamed boardrooms in designer suits. They lived modestly, yet joyfully. Lillian prepared simple meals, pasta with fresh herbs from a windowsill garden, grilled vegetables from the local farmer's market, and homemade oatmeal cookies on special occasions. On Saturdays, she and Oliver walked to the beach, collecting seashells and building sandcastles. In the evenings, they read stories under a single lamp, Oliver's head resting on her lap. Lillian cherished these moments, feeling more connected to her son than she ever had to anyone else. Still, financial struggles loomed. Rent for the cottage increased each year. Utilities fluctuated with the harsh New England winters. And every few months, she had to face unexpected emergencies. Like the time Oliver fell ill with a high fever and medical bills tore a hole in her precarious budget. Or the day her car broke down, forcing her to walk to the library, Oliver's small hand clutched in hers, braving a sudden drizzle. But never once did she consider asking Andrew for help, or even letting him know. To her, that was a door firmly shut. George Thompson, the kindly librarian, noticed Lillian's resilience and offered his emotional support. Over cups of tea, he'd share stories of his late wife Mary and how their love withstood hardship. "You remind me of Mary," he'd say, voice trembling with nostalgia, "a quiet fighter." Lillian found strength in these conversations, grateful for a fatherly presence she'd lacked in her own life. By the time Oliver was 4, Lillian had managed small savings. She was determined to eventually leave the tiny cottage for a slightly larger house. Not a mansion, but a cozy place with enough room for Oliver to run around, maybe even a small backyard. In her dreams, it was a white picket fence, home with a bookshelf-laden living room, her personal heaven. Most nights, when Oliver was asleep, she'd think of Andrew. It wasn't longing for the man who had broken her heart, so much as it was sadness for the father who would never know this incredible child. She'd imagine Oliver's earnest questions and bright discoveries, all the moments Andrew missed. Sometimes she felt guilty, questioning if she had robbed her son of his rightful father. But then she recalled the emptiness of that mansion, the emotional neglect she endured. Ultimately, she reassured herself that she had done what was necessary to protect them both. In those quiet reflections, she promised herself one thing: she would remain strong, not just for Oliver, but for herself. Because that's what a mother did. She found the will to keep going, even when the entire world seemed to conspire against her. Unbeknownst to her, that strength would soon be tested in ways she could never have anticipated. 5 years had passed since Lillian left Houston. In that time, Andrew Whitmore's empire thrived, capturing new sectors, technology investments, sustainable energy, and even philanthropic endeavors to polish the Whitmore image. Despite these triumphs, whispers of Andrew's personal life loomed in elite circles. Rumors circulated that he once had a secret wife or that he had fathered a child. Society gossips found it scandalous that no evidence ever surfaced. Andrew neither confirmed nor denied these rumors. To him, they cut too deep to address. In Fairhaven, the gentle routine of Lillian and Oliver's life was about to be upended. One crisp autumn day, a black luxury sedan appeared outside the library, conspicuous among the usual parade of aging pickup trucks and compact cars. A tall, steely-eyed man stepped out, scanning the surroundings. He entered the library, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. Lillian, engrossed in reorganizing the children's books, barely noticed his presence until he spoke. "Miss S. Whitmore," he said quietly, his voice resonating with a kind of practiced politeness that made her heart jolt. No one here ever called her by that name. Slowly, she turned around. He introduced himself as Thomas Jenkins, a private investigator hired to look into properties in the area for a client. But his gaze suggested a deeper motive. Lillian's pulse fluttered with alarm. Could he be working for Andrew, or perhaps Richard? Her immediate thought was for Oliver. Was he safe at daycare? She mustered a cordial smile, replied that she was just Miss Monroe, and tried to dismiss him. Yet Jenkins lingered. He probed gently about her background, her reason for moving to Fairhaven, whether she had any family in Texas. Each question was a push against a locked door. Though Lillian maintained her composure, her anxiety soared. She deflected politely, but Jenkins's eyes flickered, as though confirming an internal suspicion. Afterward, she rushed to pick Oliver up and hurried him home. That evening, her mind whirled with fears. If Andrew had found her, what did he want? And could she possibly stand to see him again after all these years? Would he sue for custody, or force Oliver into the same cold environment she escaped? Lillian clutched her son, tears threatening to spill at the thought of losing him. She called Jennifer Maxwell, one of the few mutual friends who had known both her and Andrew before everything fell apart. Jennifer's gentle voice carried across the phone lines, a lifeline in her confusion. "I haven't heard from Andrew in ages, but I do know Richard's health has been declining," Jennifer explained softly. "And when powerful men get desperate, they do desperate things. Just be prepared." Days passed without further sign of Jenkins, and Lillian dared to hope it was a false alarm. But then came a letter postmarked from Houston, with only a blank return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed in crisp font. "Lillian, I've located you. I have questions only you can answer." Her heart pounded in her ears. The letter's brevity felt like a slow, burning fuse. She took a shaky breath, reading it over and over. Could Andrew truly have found her after so long? What did he want from her now? Was he going to barge into her life and disrupt the fragile stability she'd built for Oliver? That night, she barely slept. She recalled Andrew's face, the sparkle of ambition in his eyes. She remembered the sanctuary of his arms in their early days, the heartbreak of being left alone when she needed him most. The love that once warmed her now felt like an unpredictable flame. Still, no matter her dread, a part of her, buried deep, was curious to know if Andrew had changed. Did he regret driving her away? Did he still wonder about the child he'd never met? In the darkness, she steeled herself. If Andrew wanted a confrontation, she would face it. Because she wasn't just a scorned lover anymore, she was a mother, determined to shield her son. Nothing, not even the formidable Whitmore empire, would stand in the way of Oliver's well-being. Little did she realize, this reunion would uncover truths far more shocking than she could ever imagine. In Houston, Andrew stood at the broad windows of the Whitmore Tower, his reflection captured in the cityscape's gleaming glass. He held a photograph in his hand, a snapshot gleaned from Jenkins's discreet reconnaissance. It showed Lillian, her hair windswept, guiding a little boy by the hand. Andrew's stomach tightened when he looked at the child. Oliver, Jenkins had confirmed, was his son. The boy's eyes were undeniably reminiscent of Andrew's, his inquisitive stance echoing Andrew's own childhood posture. For years, Andrew had buried the ghost of Lillian's departure. Even the swirl of rumors about a secret child had seemed intangible, yet here was unassailable proof of the life he had helped create and abandoned. Beneath the corporate shark exterior, an unease simmered. The father in him, long dormant, stirred awake. He was furious at Lillian's flight, but also struck by a pang of wonder. How had she managed alone? What kind of father might he have been had he not prioritized board meetings and acquisitions? His father, Richard, had grown weak after a debilitating stroke. Confined to a wheelchair, he relied on a team of nurses to manage daily tasks. Andrew's business associates stood in line with well wishes, but Richard's eyes burned with bitterness at his own fragility. In the midst of this turmoil, Andrew had come to realize something profound. The Whitmore Empire, while vast, could collapse if it lacked a strong heir, and that heir might just be Oliver. But Andrew's decision to seek out Lillian wasn't purely about continuing the dynasty. A restless guilt, a yearning to repair the deepest mistake of his life, gnawed at him. If Oliver was truly his son, then Andrew had a responsibility to be part of his life, to make amends for years lost. That realization terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He composed the terse letter to Lillian, hoping it would open the door for a conversation. When she didn't respond, he took a more direct step, purchasing plane tickets for himself and Jenkins, and flying to Massachusetts. He wanted answers, and he wanted them in person. In Fairhaven, Lillian received the news of Andrew's arrival via Jenkins's second, equally short message. He's coming to see you. The choice is yours, face him or run. Her first instinct was to flee again, but Oliver was older now, with friends, a school routine, and a life here. Running was no longer an option. So, instead, she steeled herself for what she knew would be a heartbreaking meeting. Before heading to the library for work, she confirmed that Oliver would stay late at daycare, shielded for the moment. She had no intention of letting Andrew meet their son without understanding his intentions first. Andrew arrived at the library at dusk. He walked in wearing a sleek black coat, his broad shoulders tense with anticipation. Lillian, who'd been waiting behind the reception desk, stepped forward. Time froze for a moment as their eyes locked. 5 years of anger, sorrow, and unanswered questions coursed between them. Lillian, he managed, voice subdued. She noticed he appeared older, with faint lines of stress marking his features. There was a vulnerability in him she hadn't witnessed before. For a moment, she fought back a wave of nostalgia for the early days when he had been the man who made her heart flutter. "Andrew," she replied, her tone guarded, every muscle in her body rigid. He tried to offer a formal handshake, but she folded her arms across her chest. She demanded to know his purpose. Why show up now after ignoring her pregnancy, after letting her raise a child alone? Andrew, for his part, trembled inwardly but kept his voice steady. He spoke of regret, of not realizing what his neglect would cost, of searching for her when it was too late and never giving up the hunt. She listened, her heartbreak welling up as old memories returned with startling clarity. She'd loved this man once, so deeply that the smallest moments with him felt incandescent. But that love had also brought her immeasurable pain. She wasn't about to let her guard down now. When Andrew asked to meet Oliver, her heart lurched. A swirl of protective fury rose in her. She told him Oliver wasn't a bargaining chip. If Andrew truly wanted a relationship, he needed to prove he cared about more than just legacy. Andrew, eyes clouded with remorse, nodded solemnly. He wanted that chance, he was desperate for it. That night, Lillian returned home with tears clouding her vision, uncertain whether to trust Andrew's newfound remorse or fortify her defenses. One thing was clear, fate had intervened yet again, tangling their destinies in ways neither could have foreseen. And before long, a secret fortune and deeper mysteries would unveil themselves, shaking both their worlds. Lillian's emotions waged war inside her. She had to decide, would she allow Andrew a path back into Oliver's life, or shield her son from the heartbreak? She knew Andrew was capable of causing. A week passed after their tense reunion in the library. Andrew stayed in Fairhaven, renting a small suite at a local bed and breakfast. He made no demands, sending only a steady stream of apologetic messages, short letters delivered to the cottage, filled with heartfelt pleas to let him explain everything. Lillian, torn, read each one carefully but never replied. Late one evening, a knock rattled her front door. Expecting Andrew, she opened it cautiously only to find Thomas Jenkins, the private investigator. A serious expression clouded his face. He apologized for the intrusion and asked if she was aware of any inheritance in her name. Confused, Lillian insisted she had no claim to the Whitmore fortune, having signed divorce papers that relinquished any rights. Jenkins hesitated, then handed her a legal envelope. Inside, Lillian found documents that detailed a trust fund in her name. According to the paperwork, after her mother's death, an unexpected stock portfolio had passed to Lillian. It was worth a staggering amount. Her mother, Harriet Monroe, had invested in a fledgling tech company decades ago, a company that had since skyrocketed. The shares, largely forgotten, had been gathering extraordinary interest. Now, Harriet's only child, Lillian, stood to inherit a substantial fortune. The news made her knees buckle. She grasped the doorframe to steady herself. She had believed she was alone in the world, struggling to make ends meet, while an unforeseen legacy lay in wait. Why hadn't her mother mentioned these investments? Or perhaps Harriet had simply never realized the magnitude they'd someday reach. This revelation changed everything. Lillian wouldn't need Andrew's help, or the Whitmore Empire's resources to secure Oliver's future. She could provide on her own terms. Confusion quickly turned to suspicion, though. Why was Jenkins handing her these documents? Was this somehow orchestrated by Andrew? The investigator insisted Andrew had nothing to do with the trust. Jenkins had only stumbled upon the information while examining public records, an attempt to gauge Lillian's financial stability, presumably for child custody concerns. Yet the discovery felt too convenient to ignore. Overnight, Lillian's life transformed. The small-town gossip networks buzzed with rumors about how she had come into money, referencing the elegant man from Texas lurking around. She dreaded the idea that this twist would make Andrew see her not just as the mother of his child, but also as some sort of financial ally. Or worse, that the Whitmores might try to stake a claim on her newly revealed wealth. The next morning, Andrew appeared on her doorstep, looking both hesitant and resolute. She clutched the doorframe, bracing for a confrontation about the trust. But he surprised her by gently asking if he could speak to Oliver, just once. Lillian studied his expression, no sign of gloating, no mention of the inheritance. With a weary sigh, she nodded and led him to the modest living room where Oliver was busy scribbling crayons on a coloring book. The introduction was both awkward and profoundly poignant. Andrew knelt beside Oliver, eyes brimming with an emotion Lillian had never seen in him, awe. Oliver regarded Andrew with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. His polite greeting, "Hi, I'm Oliver," made Andrew's breath hitch. That moment was like a window into all the lost years, the fatherly instincts Andrew had ignored for too long. Gradually, Andrew and Oliver began to bond over conversation about superheroes, favorite books, and little jokes that only children find funny. Lillian observed from the doorway, heart twisting. She remembered the bitterness, the nights of sobbing into her pillow, the bone-deep loneliness. Yet she also saw something real passing between Andrew and Oliver, a connection that no wealth could manufacture. As the sun set, Andrew took his leave. Before stepping out, he turned to Lillian, voice trembling with sincerity. "I'm not here for your trust fund. I didn't even know. I wanted to meet my son, to try and be part of his life." She watched his retreating figure, uncertain whether to believe him. A new chapter had begun, spurred by a secret fortune and a father's remorse. But Lillian couldn't shake the feeling that more twists lay ahead, waiting to unravel them both. The days following Oliver's introduction to Andrew were tense but strangely hopeful. Lillian allowed Andrew occasional visits, supervised in the living room or during walks on the beach. Oliver, initially guarded, warmed to Andrew's gentle questions about his favorite stories or the seashell collections he kept in a shoebox. Lillian noticed how Andrew made a visible effort to be present, focusing entirely on Oliver whenever they were together. Still, shadows from the past lurked. Lillian wrestled with conflicting emotions. Relief that Oliver now had a chance to know his father, fear that Andrew's presence might reawaken old wounds, and uncertainty about Andrew's sincerity. Was he truly repentant, or was this part of an elaborate Whitmore plan? Everything reached a boiling point when Richard Whitmore unexpectedly arrived in Fairhaven, accompanied by a personal nurse and 2 security aides. It was as though a dark cloud descended upon the quaint town. Lillian heard about his arrival from a neighbor who had seen a limousine parked by the waterfront. A jolt of dread shot through her. Richard had always exerted a chilling influence, dominating Andrew's life. What was he doing here, especially in his frail condition? Andrew learned the news only minutes later, receiving a phone call from his father's nurse. A flush of panic and anger overcame him. The last thing he wanted was Richard scaring Lillian away again. He raced to the town's small inn, where Richard had taken up a suite. The old man, bedridden by weakness, looked up with sharp eyes. The moment Andrew walked in, "Is it true?" Richard demanded. "You found the boy?" Andrew nodded, voice tight. "His name is Oliver, father. And yes, he's my son." Richard let out a bark of a laugh that deteriorated into a coughing fit. The Whitmore heir. He gazed at Andrew with a mixture of triumph and bitterness. And Lillian, does she think she can keep him from the family legacy? Anger flared in Andrew. He was no longer the timid son vying for his father's approval. She's raised him alone for 5 years. "Don't talk like she's some intruder. But Richard waved a bony hand dismissively. "Spare me your sentiment. I came to ensure that our family name remains intact. If you won't secure the boy's future, I will." Andrew's mind flashed to a younger version of himself, cowering under Richard's stern gaze. He recalled the years of emotional manipulation, all in the name of preserving the Whitmore empire. But standing there, Andrew recognized how misguided that empire had become. He wanted Oliver to have a life free of the suffocating demands that once ruled Andrew's own upbringing. Meanwhile, word of Richard's arrival reached Lillian. Memories of his frosty gaze at her wedding, his brusque attempts to intrude on her prenatal care, flooded her. She dreaded meeting him again. But if she wanted to protect Oliver, she knew she might have no choice. Summoning courage, she went to the inn that evening, determined to confront the old man face to face. In the hotel suite, tension crackled in the air. Richard glared at Lillian from his reclined position, veins visible on his pale temples. He unleashed a barrage of accusations. You ran off with a Whitmore heir. You had no right to hide him from his legacy. Lillian's hands trembled, but she held her ground, voice quiet, yet resolute. I left because Andrew wasn't there for us. I needed to protect my child from this relentless obsession with power. Richard opened his mouth to retort, but Andrew stepped between them. For the first time, he defied his father openly. Enough, father. This is my family, my decision. I won't force Oliver into the same cold environment that nearly destroyed me. A tense silence followed, broken only by Richard's labored breathing. Then his gaze flicked toward Lillian. If you truly care for the boy, he rasped, you'll accept the financial security only we can provide. The world can be cruel and he'll need protection. Lillian felt a surge of pride and heartbreak. She grasped Andrew's hand, a gesture of unity that surprised even her. Oliver will have security, she said firmly, thinking of her newly discovered fortune. And love, something no amount of Whitmore money ever truly provided. For once, Richard had no retort. With a scowl, he waved them off, leaving Andrew and Lillian to wonder if they had just fended off a final threat or if the old patriarch had another plan in motion. Little did they know, one last dramatic twist was already brewing, ready to shatter the fragile peace they had just begun to forge. The final storm descended on a quiet afternoon. Lillian had just finished her shift at the library, Oliver in tow, when she received a frantic call from the nurse at the inn. Richard Whitmore was in critical condition, his health deteriorating rapidly. Despite the animosity, Lillian felt a twinge of compassion. She knew Andrew would want to be there. They rushed to the inn, where Andrew paced outside Richard's suite. The old man lay propped against pillows, his complexion ashen, breath labored. When he spotted Lillian and Oliver, he summoned a feeble smirk. With surprising gentleness, he beckoned Oliver closer. The boy, curious but cautious, approached. I was wrong. About many things, Richard whispered, each word an effort. He reached out a trembling hand, and Oliver hesitantly took it. I wanted my family to remain strong, but I forgot the strength that comes from love. Tears streaked Andrew's face as he knelt beside the bed, one hand on Oliver's shoulder, the other grasping his father's arm. The grandeur and arrogance that once defined Richard Whitmore flickered away, replaced by the fragile humanity of a dying man. With a last raspy breath, he murmured, "Take care of each other," before his eyes slid shut, and life slipped from him. In the days that followed, arrangements were made to bring Richard's body back to Houston for a funeral befitting the Whitmore name. Despite their fraught history, Andrew invited Lillian and Oliver to join him. Lillian hesitated but ultimately agreed, if not for Richard, then to support Andrew as he laid the past to rest. They traveled to Texas, Oliver marveling at the skyscrapers and sprawling highways. The funeral was a grand affair, attended by influential figures from across the nation. Eulogies praised Richard's business acumen and philanthropic acts. Privately, Andrew delivered a more personal farewell, acknowledging his father's flaws but also his drive, which had inadvertently molded Andrew into a man who understood both power and its perils. In the aftermath, legalities surfaced. To everyone's surprise, Richard had amended his will in his final days, recognizing Oliver as his heir. The Whitmore empire would pass to Andrew, but with a stipulation that Oliver receive a significant trust at the age of 25. Lillian, bracing for a potential legal battle, found Andrew unwaveringly by her side. Oliver's inheritance is his birthright, he told her gently, and so is a father who respects him. Their bond, once shattered, began to mend with slow determination. Lillian guarded her heart, but she also acknowledged Andrew's genuine transformation. No longer preoccupied with relentless deals, Andrew spent time building a relationship with Oliver, teaching him to fly a kite in the park, guiding him through simple math homework, and reading bedtime stories. The sincerity of these moments chipped away at Lillian's walls. Meanwhile, Lillian's own inheritance loomed, a fortune she'd never asked for but could no longer ignore. In a final twist, the tech company's shares soared again, nearly doubling their value. Overwhelmed by this newfound wealth, Lillian pondered how best to use it. Perhaps she would start a scholarship for single mothers or fund expansions at the Fairhaven Library that had once given her a lifeline. When the time came to leave Houston, Lillian stood with Andrew on the balcony of the Whitmore mansion. They gazed out at the neon skyline, Oliver asleep upstairs, lulled by the hum of late-night traffic. Andrew quietly slipped a small velvet box into Lillian's hand. Inside sparkled the ring he'd once given her, the day he proposed all those years ago. She inhaled sharply, memories flooding back. "I don't expect anything," Andrew said, voice filled with earnest humility. "All I ask is a chance to show you that I can be the husband and father I wasn't before." Tears glistened in Lillian's eyes, heart torn between doubt and hope. In the end, she closed the box gently, placed her free hand over Andrew's, and said, "I'm not ready for that yet. But maybe, someday, we can start again." It wasn't a grand reconciliation or a fairy tale ending, but it was a new beginning, a future rewritten by regret, shaped by second chances, and guided by a love that refused to give up. Together, they returned to Fairhaven, uncertain of the road ahead, but determined to walk it side by side, for Oliver's sake and for their own. Because some fortunes can't be measured in dollars or lavish estates, they're found in the promise of a family pieced back together, stronger than before. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of heartbreak, hope, and ultimate redemption. Lillian's unwavering dedication to her son, Oliver, proves that the strongest love can flourish even in life's darkest corners. Andrew's profound transformation reminds us that it's never too late to right our wrongs and pursue the family we almost lost. And, of course, Richard Whitmore's final admission shows the power of letting go of control so that a legacy can be built on love, not just wealth. If this story of second chances, secrets, and unexpected fortunes captured your imagination, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe. By spreading the word, you help us bring more powerful tales of hope and perseverance to life. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing our next heart-stirring story with you soon.